In diesem Interview spreche ich mit Trevor von LearnerLab. Trevor beschäftigt sich seit über 10 Jahren mit der Frage, wie der Mensch wirklich lernt. Ich habe Trevor über seine Social-Media-Kanäle gefunden, in denen er vor allem über Growth- und Stress-Mindset spricht und darüber hinaus ganz wunderbar darstellt, wie das Lernen im Gehirn eigentlich funktioniert. Ich habe für mich persönlich dadurch ganz viele Dinge für meinen eigenen Unterricht und die Schule mitgenommen und ich glaube, wenn dich diese Themen interessieren, dann wirst auch du in unserem Interview wahnsinnig viel lernen. Ich schätze Trevors Arbeit sehr, einmal, weil mich seine Inhalte interessieren, aber auf der anderen Seite auch, weil man merkt, dass Trevor sich mit den wissenschaftlichen Studien und den Wissenschaftlern selbst ganz tiefgründig auseinandergesetzt hat und dieses Wissen ganz konkret auf die Schule anwendet. Trevor teilt seine Inhalte nämlich nicht nur auf Social Media oder auf YouTube, sondern er gibt Workshops an Schulen fürs Growth Mindset und arbeitet mit Kindern und Jugendlichen und Lehrkräften super intensiv zusammen. Wenn du zudem erfahren möchtest, was es mit der Anti-Talent-Show auf sich hat, dann bleib auf jeden Fall dran. Und wenn dir das Video gefallen hat, dann vergiss auf keinen Fall, mir ein Like dazulassen, zu subscriben und allen Pädagogen, Lehrkräften oder Leuten, die sich für Schule und Entwicklung interessieren, weiterzuleiten. Hi Trevor! It's so good to have you with me today, and I'm so happy that you agreed to have a conversation with me today about learning, which is a vast topic, but I'm sure we're going to have some deep dives there. I'm very fascinated by your work. I found out about you and your work through your podcast. So I was reading a book about growth mindset, and I found the name David Yeager. And I just thought, well, I want to find out a bit more about him and what he does, because actually he's a colleague or co-worker of Carol Dweck, who's like the queen of growth mindset. And I just wanted to find out a bit more about him. And so I typed in his name into Spotify, and then your podcast popped up and I listened to your episode and I was hooked right away, because not only you offer like the methods and strategies how to help people grow or develop a growth mindset, you also you summarize the scientific backgrounds in such a good on-point way, which I really appreciate and which is rare to find, I think, because growth mindset, the term is thrown around a lot, and you really pinpointed everything that was important about the scientific background, which was amazing. Afterwards, I also found out that you have a YouTube channel, which is also very interesting and nice to watch. I really like the content you do there. And then on top of that, you do workshops where you actually teach people face-to-face how to become better learners, what growth mindset is, what stress mindset is. And I just read that you do those in like different institutions and for instance in prisons, which is I guess interesting as an experience. Maybe you can give us some insight into that. But also you work with Olympic baseball teams, different companies, and last but not least schools. Which is, of course, interesting for me since I'm a teacher and my followers most of them are teachers. So you share your knowledge online in various ways, which I appreciate. So thank you for doing that. And also, I really think your work is amazing. That's why I asked you to have a conversation with me today. And is there anything that I forgot? Is there anything that you want to add?
I think that's a good summary. It's like you and I are similar. I'm really curious about learning and how to help people get better at it. And there's a lot of really good information out there, a lot of good science, a lot of good research. And so what I try to do is find the science, talk to the researchers, and then really try to understand, like, okay, what does this actually mean? And then how can you explain it to just like a normal person like us? Like you and I, we're not neuroscientists. And that's kind of like what I've been focused on for a long time now. How do you explain stuff in a way that people can use it? And then how do you connect dots from different topics? Like a lot of times in the world of research and science, like people have to focus on one idea and that's their job. But I think it's important to find like the overlaps and the way that different topics can enhance one another. And so that's all that I really care about. Connecting dots, explaining it in a way that people could use it.
Yeah. And I think this is exactly what I'm trying to do at the moment, like along the way. I'm still in a process, but trying to find out how these different dots that you just mentioned can be connected in order to help students to become better learners, to make the quality of schools better. And you offer great value for that. So why learning, Trevor? How is where did it all start?
So I think I sort of stumbled into it that like 12 years ago when I started this, it was more just a blog where if I like read a book, I would interview the author, or I would interview interesting like coaches in the sports world. And I would just write up little articles and make little videos. And it was funny because like at that time, growth mindset wasn't as popular as it is now. And so one of the first books that I read was Carol Dweck's book, Growth Mindset. And I just emailed her and she responded that same day. She's like, oh, I'd love to do an interview. And so like I was kind of early to that party. And then what happened is I started to make videos and articles about the interview that I did with her. And this is like right when her work really started to catch fire. And so then my stuff started to like pick up on that momentum, and it kind of blew up from there. And so your question was why learning? And I really do think that learning is fascinating because it can benefit anybody. So anybody first can get better at learning because it's a skill that can be improved. Second, learning is a universal skill, which means it can help anybody in any situation. So like any human, if we get a little bit better at learning, it will benefit us. And then I think the third reason I'm excited about learning is it's the most important skill. So like if I'm good at learning, it's not just useful in the classroom, it's useful in sports, it's useful in life. So like good learners, they're better at solving problems and better at dealing with change, and good learners can build new skills. So it's like the ultimate skill. And so then what I've tried to do for the last 12 years is ask the simple question, the same one you're asking, which is how do we get better at learning, and how do we help the people around us get better at learning? And of course, there's hundreds of different things you could do there. But what I try to do is find like the most high impact topics that affect the most people. And those are the ones I spend the most time on.
Yeah, amazing. It's very interesting for me also, or I think for all the Germans, to know more about the culture of growth mindset, because I feel in Germany, I know we just started talking about it for maybe 2 or 3 years. People started to share stuff about that. There's been research for over 30 years. When would you say did it start off in the US to become a thing that people talk about in companies and schools and stuff? Can you like roughly?
Yeah, I would say for the last 10 years, it's been blowing up over here, but the research has been around for over 30 years, like you mentioned. So the idea itself isn't new, but I would say in the last 10 years, it started in education. So at the beginning, it was mostly like educators, schools, understanding how important it is. And now it's starting to expand outside of the classroom and into the sports world. It's expanding into the corporate world. And so it's cool because I like it to work in all three of those buckets, and it's becoming more of a popular thing. But I would say, like, if you went to a school in the US and you were working with a bunch of educators and you said, are you familiar with Carol Dweck's growth mindset research? Almost every school would say yes. Yesterday, though, I was working with a huge corporate group and I said the same thing. And they're like, we don't know who Carol Dweck is. So it's like, it's the most advanced in education. Sports and the corporate world are lagging a little behind, but it's starting to blow up in those worlds as well. And I think, honestly, it's exciting when a topic catches fire like this, but then a few problems kind of spring up. And one is sometimes when everyone's talking about an idea, we lose sight of like what the actual research says. So some people make growth mindset out to be this like magic thing that solves all of our problems and does this, this, and this. It's not that, but it is an essential piece of learning. So it's an important part of the learning equation, but there are other things that you need to do as well if you want to get better at learning. It's not just if you develop a growth mindset that solves all of our problems, because that's not the case at all. But we do need to understand what it is. We do need to understand kind of how to foster it with like ourselves and the people around us.
Very interesting, because I think if I would ask the question in German schools, very few people would know. I mean, there's some people who've heard about it, but they're not really familiar. Sure. So it's interesting for me, for one, to know do you know anything about how the concept entered American schools? So how did it get there? Was there like this, did the state say every school has to do a workshop on that? Or is it, it's structured differently than in Germany, I think. How did you get that into the schools?
So I think it was Carol Dweck's book was like the starting point where her book is really good at explaining kind of the benefits of growth mindset and how it like plays out in different situations. So I think that took off. But then at about the same time, there's a big movement of people doing kind of what I do, which is like sharing interesting ideas through podcasts and videos and articles. So that picked up a lot of momentum. So I think it was kind of like the perfect storm, but it wasn't like the government was like, everyone has to talk about this thing. But I think it was just it was the right place at the right time. It's an interesting idea. And in the end, it's really simple to understand. It's like this idea in a nutshell, growth mindset is, I believe I can learn and change and grow. And that might seem kind of like basic, but if you take a step back and think about like, well, why does that matter? I think it matters a lot. And the way I think about it is, okay, growth mindset is I believe I can change and grow. Then the opposite mindset that people talk about is fixed mindset. That's the idea that I'm sort of stuck with the skills I have and can't change them very much. Now, there's some kind of misunderstandings around this. Like fixed mindset is not the belief that you're bad at stuff. So if I say like, I'm bad at dancing, that doesn't mean I have a fixed mindset. Like that's just me being aware of my strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Now, if I say I can't get better at dancing, then that is more of a fixed mindset, right? Like it's, I can't change this skill.
Mm-hmm. It's like the same. It's like the same when students, for instance, say, "Well, math is just not my thing. I will never
100%.
Become good at math." Right?
Exactly. And the problem is, though, sometimes when teachers learn about this, and then a student says, "I'm bad at math," and then we go, "Oh, that's a fixed mindset," but it's not. So, but like, understanding your strengths and weaknesses has nothing to do with the mindset research. It's always about, do I believe I can change this thing or not? And that's it. And so like my number one recommendation for anyone listening is remember what the research is about. It's not about confidence. It's not about understanding our strengths and weaknesses. It's simply about our belief in our capacity to change. Now, then you build off of that and go, why is that so important? Well, to me, it's pretty logical that if I don't believe I can make a change, I'm probably not going to engage in enough action to create the change. So like, if you think about even just improving my health, if I don't believe I can improve my health, I'm probably not going to like make adjustments in my nutrition, and I'm probably not going to exercise, because why would I if I don't think I can change the thing? Well, the problem is if I don't improve my nutrition and if I don't exercise, I'm probably not going to improve my health. And so you see, it's this idea that I can't change robs me of the action, and without the action, I can't change. But then you flip it, and you see why growth mindset matters. It's, if I do believe that I can improve my health. I'm more likely to make adjustments to my nutrition, more likely to exercise. And if I do those things, I see progress. And again, we're not saying everyone is going to make huge changes in everything they try to do or be the best at everything. All we're saying is humans are capable of change, but we must engage in action to create that change. And then you go, I must believe I can make that change if I want to engage in action. So it's kind of this domino effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something for all the skeptics, I think, out there who don't believe in mindset work, right? Because I feel there's a big group who says, well, mindset interventions, it is a bit vague, like in how can you really change the belief of people? But I feel there's also like science that backs up that it works, right?
Yeah.
Maybe let's go a bit deeper into the biology behind the concept of learning. There's this term neuroplasticity, which I just learned through your podcasts, nice. Which is, I think, an important term when we talk about growth mindset, right?
This is the perfect place to go next. So the issue I have with most of the messaging around growth mindset is we live too much on the surface. So we say, this is what a growth mindset is. It can help you learn better, because it can. But then we just go, so you should have a growth mindset. You should believe you can grow. And like, that's kind of like all we do. We say that this is an important topic and that you should do it. And then we wonder why like change doesn't occur. And so what I've been trying to do is go deeper and say, well, how can you help people build this belief without simply just telling them to have it? Like, what are the actual building blocks here? And there's like a lot of different directions you can go. And so this is kind of on the top of my mind because I did a workshop yesterday where we went through this. And so some different things that we do, and then we're going to get to neuroplasticity because that's the key. Mm-hmm. So one thing that we do that's kind of simple and easy when we're working with even adults or students, it's okay. And everyone listening can do this right now. It's just think of 2 things that you are good at. And if you take like 20 seconds, then you could probably think of like a bunch of things you're good at. Okay. So everyone listening, we've all thought of our skills, and some might be big skills, some might be small, some could be funny, some could be serious, whatever. But if you actually took the time to do that, of course, everyone listening could think of something they're good at. Great. Now we go, out of all the skills that we just identified, everyone listening, they all have 2 things in common. 1, once upon a time, you weren't as good at that skill as you are now. And 2, that was changed through experience. And I know this seems kind of basic again, but it's actually really powerful because if you're better now than you were when you started, that's proof you built that skill through trial and error, experimentation, and experience and practice. And so I love this little exercise because what's the truth about learning, and you know this, we're all doing it all the time. Like all of us are growing and changing every week, every month, every year. But sometimes we like don't recognize the growth. Sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for the growth. And so through that little reflection of like, okay, I am good at stuff and I did build those skills. You see, in a way that provides us evidence, which is I believe I can grow, growth mindset, because I'm growing all the time. And so to me, simple exercise that creates more reinforcement that supports a growth mindset. So rather than just telling people, you're showing and proving to them that they can grow. We're all changing all the time. Now, the problem is sometimes we work with people who display a strong fixed mindset of like, oh, I can't learn. But they're sitting on top of a mountain of skills that they've been building their whole life. And it's good for us as leaders to point out those skills that they've been developing. So I think that's one good strategy. Another one that I love, and there's a few schools that I work with that do this. This is my favorite. They call it the anti-talent show.
Yes.
And so it's the best. It's so there's a middle school that I work with, and they do it every year. So every teacher and every student picks something that they can't do. They all practice that skill for 2 weeks. Then they hold the anti-talent show. And so some people like learn to juggle or skateboard or paint. And no one is like an expert in their skill in just 2 weeks, but everyone can do it. Everyone's better than when they started. And I love this so much because instead of just sitting these students down and saying, you should have a growth mindset, because like, what does that even mean to the students? This is, let's go through the learning process where it's like, wow, 2 weeks ago, I could not juggle and now I can. So the students see progress, then the teachers talk about what it means to have a growth mindset. So again, not just telling the students to have it, setting up a scenario where they see the progress. And again, that's providing evidence that reinforces the growth mindset belief. So I love that strategy too.
I love it too. I would have asked you about it if you hadn't mentioned it right now.
Yeah,
it's so good on so many levels. I also feel for the connection, the relationship between students and teachers, because in schools, normally it's the case, they teach us, they know it and they can do it. And they're like, the hierarchy.
It's huge.
And in that setting, this is diffused. So we're all on one level and we're all learners. And there was one phrase that I just read, which teachers can say to students, which I love, is, I'm not like more intelligent than you or better than you are. I'm just more experienced in the things that I do or that I know. And it's so good.
So the anti-talent show is great for developing individual growth mindsets, but you nailed the even more important idea, which is when I talked to Carol Dweck, she said the thing that people mess up the most when they're trying to apply this research is we learn about it, we tell our students to do it, but then we didn't take the time to develop a growth mindset within ourselves. And so that modeling side of the equation, which is, yes, growth mindset is important. Yes, I recommend sharing it with your students, but then I need to walk the walk myself. I need to understand it. And then I need to model that. And that to me is the magic of the anti-talent show, which is, wow, as a student, I see that when my teacher, who I probably respect, and I think like, oh, this teacher is older than me and really smart. But then you see, wow, when my teacher learns something new, she struggles too. And that helps me understand that if I'm struggling, that doesn't mean that I can't do this, or it doesn't mean I'm on the wrong path. That's just part of the learning journey. And so when you see that, it helps you understand that it's okay. And then you're more likely to stick on that learning path because you're seeing these models around you. And so I could talk for hours just about the anti-talent show because I think it's so good on like so many different levels.
I agree, and then, 100%.
Then to like, I've been talking for a long time, but to answer your actual question about neuroplasticity. So like that to me is like I don't want to say final building block because there's all sorts of things you could do to build a growth mindset. But the last one that I think we should touch on for now, neuroplasticity is also a popular topic in the US now, but it's not new. Like this has been around longer than even growth mindset. So the idea is this is the research that shows when we learn something new, our brains actually change physically during this process. So the name kind of describes it. So neuro translates to like brain, and then plasticity translates to it can change. So it's kind of the research that shows that as we develop skills and learn, our brains are changing in the process. And so the way to think about it is our brain is a series of all sorts of different like circuits and pathways. And then any action we take fires a specific pathway in our brain. And if you fire a pathway enough times in the right way, over time, our brain in a way like reinforces that circuit, and then we can fire it a little bit better. So the sort of the phrase that the neuroscientists use over here is they say, what fires together wires together. And that's a good way to understand like the biology of skill development. Okay, so that side is interesting, but to me, for the people listening, what we need to understand about the neuroplasticity research is not necessarily like the terminology or the parts of the brain or any of that. What we need to understand is this. A few years ago, I interviewed Dr. Michael Merzenich, and he is a world famous neuroscientist. He in the US is known as the father of neuroplasticity. So this is like one of the original researchers to really dig into this field. And I had a great conversation with him. And my favorite thing he said, he looks at the camera and he goes, our research shows that virtually anybody can get better at pretty much anything. So anybody can get better at pretty much any skill. And we need to, again, unpack exactly what he means by that. He's not saying like, I'm going to become an astronaut or Trevor is going to become a professional basketball player. So he's not saying anyone can do anything, because that's not true. There's like all sorts of stuff we can't do. But what he is saying is, if it's a skill, and most things are, you can get better at that skill and probably better than you think. That's all he's saying. He's also not saying you have to learn everything or you're going to learn everything or you're going to be the best at everything. It's simply this research that shows with good practice, pretty much anybody can improve any skill. Now, connect that back to growth mindset. And again, we're connecting dots here. The neuroplasticity research has nothing to do with Carol Dweck's growth mindset research, but think about the way that they interact. Growth mindset says, I believe I can grow. Neuroplasticity is saying, you can grow. So it's like, if you want to build a true growth mindset, I think it is important to teach people about the brain. Now, a mistake that I made for years, and a mistake that a lot of people make over here, is we get so excited about the brain, but then we overcomplicate it. So we're like teaching students about like, here's the parts of the brain, and this is how like you fire a pathway, and all that's fine. But the way we do it now is simple. It's, hey, our brain, like one of its main functions is to learn. It's a learning machine. It's like, that's one of its key jobs. And when you put your brain in the right environment and give it some time to do its job, to fire the pathway and to struggle and to solve the problem, again, our capacity to grow is much greater than we know. This thing is built to learn. We just have to like use it properly. And kind of that's our approach to talking about neuroplasticity now. So you kind of zoom out, you say, through reflecting, through going through the learning process, through understanding neuroplasticity, all these are different building blocks to like reinforce this belief that we're chasing, which is I can grow, growth mindset.
Yeah, amazing. It's so good to know, and you evaluate it in a very good way so that everybody can understand. I think, even though we're talking about neuroscience here, which is a complex field. And this reminds me of one of my students, or some of my students. I mean, I have one student in my class, my 8th grade class, and she's very good at drawing. So there's for sure some talent behind that. But apart from that, she's been practicing a lot. So every minute of the day where she has free time, she's drawing. And there are some other students in my class who said, well, she's so good at drawing. Why can't I be that good at it? And stuff like that. And I said, well, yes, but keep in mind, she has been practicing a whole lot. And if you put that effort into learning how to become a better drawer, 100% you would see progress. So,
yes.
Yeah. Maybe coming back to the workshops that you do at schools, because I feel this is something that teachers are very interested in. Can you give us some insight of how you do it? So we talked about the anti-talent show. Do you start off with that, and then do you move on to talking about some theoretical background, the neuroscience behind it? Or what else do you do with students, with teachers, which has proven to really help schools?
So lots of things. We used to just kind of go in and focus mostly on the students, like, hey, here's what a growth mindset is, here's how to build it. And that's where we'd spend most of our time. There's been some new research, and this was done by David Yeager, so it's awesome that you brought him up, that shows that kind of an update that they've made recently in the growth mindset research is just understanding that the mindset of the leader matters maybe even more than they originally thought. And so it is good. It is good to like share with others, but then we need to focus on our mindset. We kind of mentioned that earlier, but then there's like an other side to it, which is as leaders and educators and parents, we need to be really careful about the messaging that we give our students and kids. That so many times, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, the idea of like math isn't my thing. Mm-hmm. Well, where is that coming from? A lot of the times it could be coming from home, that maybe my parent wasn't very good at math. So they have this idea that like, oh, math just isn't in our family or in our genes or whatever. And then my parent says that to me. And then as a young student, if I believe that, like, oh yeah, I'm just not a math person, that really hurts my learning. Because if my belief is I'm not a math person, it's robbing me of engagement and practice. And then it kind of becomes true. And so we need to be careful with our messaging that we're giving our students. And again, I'm not saying everyone's going to be the best at everything. And it's also okay to point out people's strengths and weaknesses. It's like, hey, you're really good at this. That's fine. Hey, this isn't your strongest skill. But underneath all of that needs to be the foundation that we believe that change is possible. We believe that the people we work with and lead and parent are capable of learning, because they are. And so the argument we use in our workshops and what we try to train the teachers and educators on is your students are all different. They all have strengths and weaknesses. But underneath that is everyone we work with is a learner. And then we have to treat them accordingly. So like, if I truly believe that you are a learner, I can't put you in a box anymore and tell you what you can't learn and can't do. Now, this also doesn't mean that we're fake with people. So treating you as a learner is not me saying, you are the best at math in this class, if that's not true. Mm-hmm. Treating you as a learner is saying, look, you know, and I know math isn't your strongest subject, but math is a skill. It's a skill that can be built with practice and struggle and experimentation. And with some time and practice, you can get better at that skill. And I'm here to help. That is way better to say than you're just not a math person. And then, okay, you replace math with any skill and you start to see the importance of our messaging and our feedback and the things that we say to the people around us. Mm-hmm. And so honestly, that's where we spend a lot of our time, is just understanding that our words have power, and then also understanding that our actions have a lot of power. So what are we modeling for the people around us? Are we talking about learning? How do we respond to a mistake? all of those things matter a lot if we're trying to create this environment of a growth mindset.
Yeah. So you work with teachers a lot then these days. And I think this is important. I think this is also a way to start, because it's very easy, and I catch myself doing that. I'm not blaming everyone else, but it's very easy to say, well, this student, he's just lazy, or he is just a lazy person. He's just, I don't know, you name it, fill in the blank. And I think this is where we have to start, and where we have to say, no, he's just not that. He's maybe that in that classroom, or in that situation, or in that subject. And there is the capacity to change for everyone.
Yes. And more times than not, what we see on the surface is just the tip of like the iceberg, that there's more going on. And so sometimes we see a student and we label them as lazy or unmotivated, when, okay, that's what it looks like, but there's something happening under the surface. And sometimes it could be related to their mindset. Like, maybe they just don't think they can learn this. And so they look like they're lazy, but it's actually something deeper, which is, I don't think I can do this.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where growth mindset would be really helpful. But other times it could be something else. So it could also be, I believe that I can learn this, but I don't like the feeling of struggling, of being uncomfortable. Like, I don't like that. And that could be a reason that I resist this lesson. So again, we're going deeper. It's like, we're trying to understand the root cause of this symptom. Is it growth or fixed mindset? Is it they don't want to feel weird, or they don't want to look bad? That's a different area of research that I think we can get into in a second. But I would always recommend, it's like, let's try to dig deeper and see what's going on, and not just label this student as like, oh, they don't care, they're lazy. There could be all sorts of things happening deeper down that we need to address.
Yeah. I'm trying to do those things. I'm trying to communicate with my students in a way that they learn that they can become better. So in the growth mindset way. Yeah. But I oftentimes feel like the school system as such, is a contradiction to what I'm trying to teach my students, because they're writing exams. And I say, well, every exam is a way for you to learn from your mistakes, see where you can improve, and then pick one thing you will not do next time. And the students say, yeah, well, it's nice, but to be honest, I'm graded on this, and all of these grades will add up in the end and will have an impact. Yeah. So it's the question that arises for me sometimes is, how much impact can I as a teacher really have when the system is structured in the way it is? Which leads to the question of, what should we do? Process-based learning or output-oriented learning? Is there a combination possible? Or I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's tricky. So like, I'm with you that some of the things that happen in education sort of make this hard. But I do know this. Learning and performance aren't enemies. So sometimes if you look online, we make them out to be like, you have to choose one or the other. It's like, are you going to learn or perform well? But if you just take a step back and look at this from like different perspectives, I hope people see that learning encourages performance. So like, when I work with a sports team, they want to win games. That is an outcome that they're pursuing. How do we achieve that outcome? Well, let's get really good at learning. And if we get really good at learning, the players get better at stuff. The team gets better at stuff. We score more points. We win more games. So it's like those things work together like this. It's not just like, hey, you have to choose one or the other. It's like they play off of one another. But then you go to education and it gets kind of messy. So you know this even better than I do, that there are students that can completely stay in their comfort zone and write a paper on a topic, and they're probably going to get an A, but not really learn anything. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to choose like the easiest topic ever that I already know about, and I'm going to write about it, and I can get an A on this topic. We are not saying that that student needs to leap so far out of their comfort zone that if they write this a different topic, they're going to get like a failing grade. Like, that's not what we're saying. All we're saying is if that student can stay in their comfort zone and autopilot their way to an A, I know that there is a topic that maybe is a little bit out of their comfort zone that would force them to engage a little bit more, but they're still going to get a good grade. So again, we're not saying you have to like sacrifice all your performances in order to learn, but all we're saying is there's small choices that we can make each and every day that stack up over time that can help us like get better at stuff. So like the same rules apply to like if I'm doing a workshop, that is the most important skill in my life. Like this is my job, is to be really, really good at doing these workshops. That's like how I make money. That's how I feed my family. Okay. I can't give the same word for word workshop every single time, because if I do, over time, that becomes outdated or I run out of people to talk to. So like, I can't just do the same thing every time, because that won't be sustainable. And there will come a day where I'm in a tough position. But at the same time, like yesterday, I was working with a company called Fidelity. It's like one of the biggest investment companies like in the world. And they paid me a lot of money to go do a training. I can't go into that training with 2 hours of just new stuff just to see what happens. Like that would be really stupid. And that would be a waste of their money, because it's like, oh yeah, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm trying some new stuff. And so again, we have to find this middle ground, which is when the outcome matters, when the performance matters, shrink the experiment. And so I try to think about this all the time with my workshops. It's like, okay, it really matters. They paid me a bunch of money. I can't run huge experiments, but I can run small ones, which is maybe I change the order of the topics or the stories and examples that I give. And so I know that seems small, but again, that stacks up over time. So these small experiments, every time I do a workshop, I get a little bit better. And then the sweet thing is, over the course of 6 months or a year, it improves a ton. So I will work with a group, come back a year later, and they watch it and they're like, wow, this is way better. And it's not because I just started from scratch. It's these small experiments stacking up over time. And that's allowing me to perform at my best and still kind of grow and adapt over time. And so again, that works for me, but I also think that's a framework that can work for students as well. So I say, when the outcome matters, you can shrink the experiment. And then another approach that I use is I call it struggling backstage. So it's like, okay, if this performance matters, think about a sports team. If they're playing at the Olympics, that's not when I want you to try this new technique that you've never done before.
Yeah.
That's not what we want. We want you to experiment with that technique in our practice facility. And so again, we're like doing it backstage. So same rules apply. Like if I'm writing an essay on a standardized test, I want to put my best foot forward. We want people to run bigger experiments, maybe not on the actual exam and test, but during homework or during like the discussion during class. So we can run experiments backstage. We can shrink the size of the experiments. And those are all ways where we're learning and growing without sacrificing the performance and outcomes.
Yeah. So it all comes down to like, or what I take from this is, the process part, or the part where we focus on the process, is the part where we prepare for the exam. meaning that I prep my students or I give them valuable feedback on how to improve, say, an essay. And then in the exam, they are well prepped, and then they can give it their best.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all pretty simple, but like that is it. And then you can, it's like, even when, I think that's a good place.
Okay.
We can overcomplicate it, but like, I like that. Yeah. I think that we're in a good place.
Okay. Our time is almost up, but I have one, I think, very important question that one of my followers asked.
Great.
And he wanted to know, in what way is learning about a growth mindset or developing a growth mindset connected to motivation? So, in other words, if I teach my students in a successful way to develop a growth mindset, will that help them to be more motivated in class as well, or is it not interlinked?
Yes. I think they are interlinked. Sometimes it could be separate. Like, there's times where I believe I can grow. I understand that I need to feel uncomfortable and struggle, but then I just don't care. And like, that's like a different thing. But I do know this. If we teach growth mindset properly and kind of educate the student on the learning process and kind of the basics there, it can really help with motivation. And it's kind of a perfect place to end this. Let's go back to the neuroscientist Michael Merzenich. Another thing he taught me in this interview, and this is a clip that I play at the end of every one of my workshops. So he goes, yes, some people are slower learners. There are students that are going to learn faster than others and be better at different skills than others. But he goes, what people need to understand is the machinery in our brain that controls learning, that is also plastic, which means like that's changeable too. So sometimes when we think about neuroplasticity, it's this pathway can change, this specific skill can be improved. And that's true. But it's bigger than that, which is the learning centers of our brain are also plastic. And what he means by that is anytime we practice something new and we get better at that skill, not only are we improving that skill, but our brain is getting better at getting better. Our brain is getting better at learning. And then you start to think about the way that that can interact and compound, which is, okay, I'm spending more time learning stuff, which means I'm getting better at stuff. And every time I do that, I get a little bit better at learning. Like that can really start to compound and make a big impact on me as an individual. And to me, when you teach people that can foster more motivation. So now if I understand that every time I learn, I get better at learning, well, maybe this subject in school isn't the most interesting thing to me. But I also know that if I kind of pay attention and work through this, even though this subject isn't that interesting, I know that my brain is still getting better at learning. So like, I think you're showing the benefits of engaging in the learning process. And then I think the other thing that we can do in education is just zoom people out and show more of the value of a subject. So like if I'm teaching math, it's like the truth is those students are probably not going to use this equation every day of their life. Of course not. We know that. I don't remember any of the equations that I learned in school. But a skill that everyone uses every day of their life is problem solving. Well, math is a place to get good at problem solving. Like that's the actual skill you're building. It's not necessarily about this equation. And so when you kind of frame it like that, people see more of the value. Same is true if we're talking about like writing. It's like, yes, we're talking about poetry or analyzing this script or whatever, but the real skill is a superpower to have in life. And you know this. If I can write clearly and concisely and argue a point or share an idea in a really clear and simple way, that's going to benefit me no matter who I am or what I do. Well, that's the skill we're building in school. It's just sometimes we don't connect those dots for the students, where it's like, I don't care about poetry. It's like, you don't need to care about poetry, but this skill of written communication is a superpower, and that is the skill that we're building.
Yeah.
And so I think that also helps with motivation.
Yeah. So building like a bigger picture for students about what are we actually doing and where does this actually take you? And I think that we're doing not enough of that at school. So it's the perfect way, I think, to end this conversation and leave all the teachers with that. Thank you, Trevor, so much for all of your insight. I could have talked to you for another 2 hours about all of the different things. There are so many more questions. And I'm really, really happy that you took the time today, even though it's very early in the US. And I enjoyed it a lot. Again, I learned a lot. I can only recommend your podcast. Everybody who's listening or watching, check out Trevor's podcast. There's much more deep dive. I will link down. There's one episode where you talk about specifically which steps you take in order to develop a growth mindset in your workshops. I will link that episode below because I think it will really help teachers if they want to work with their students on that. And apart from that, I wish you a wonderful day. And thank you.
This is fun. I had a blast. If you ever need anything, let me know. And I just want to say, like, what you're doing is important, and I hope you keep doing it. Just sharing good ideas like this to people, I think is the best. So keep it up.
Thank you.